For every dollar we put in the party fraud, the taxpayers get back at least 10 times as much. It matters. It matters. Look, COVID left its scars, like the spike in violent crime in 2020, the first year of the pandemic. We have an obligation to make sure all are safe. Public safety depends on public trust, as all of us know. But too often that trust is weak. Jerry Pierce, Tyree Nichols.
Okay, hello, Madeline. How are you?
So, um, none, a little bit the worse for wear, but I'm all right.
Good. Have you had a real busy day?
A very busy day and a very busy weekend. We, as the Green Party, we were debating and voting on whether or not to support this anti-war rally on the 19th of February, Rage Against the War Machine.
What did you decide to do?
As a party, we decided to endorse it, um, but some of the people
My son told me that y'all
aren't happy with the results, and so they're calling for. I'm the co-chair of the Green Party Peace Action Committee, and they're calling for new leadership in the Green Party Peace Action Committee because they don't like what we've been doing. So it's par for the course, I guess. Um, People not accepting decisions that are made. There are real issues that are involved, but we want to be out there speaking out against war. And some of the people who are going to be on the platform with us, don't have the best position, to say the least. They don't have the best position on transgender issues, on LGBTQ, IA plus issues, but we're coalescing, we're joining together for one event to call for an end to NATO, an end to the war, negotiations, and no more money going to Ukraine. To put the I'm sure our president talked about that tonight. And we want to free Assange, and the issues that we share common cause with. Those are the issues we're going to be highlighting and talking about how, in order to it's not enough to end war. We also have to fight for social, economic, environmental justice, and we're going to differentiate ourselves from the other organizers and put forward our full anti-war agenda.
It sounds great to me.
Thank you.
Okay, to get to the primary topic
Yes.
of this show, of course,
Yes, I know.
it is our reactions to the State of the Union. The State of the Union is not over. At least last time I looked, it's not over. Hang on a second. Yeah, he's still speaking. Okay, but I think we all have impressions, okay, at least up to roughly 10 o'clock or so. So let us give our impressions.
I'm going to yield to you and to Dee on this to get it started because anytime I try to listen to the State of the Union, I was blocked on my phone. So,
Oh my
um,
God, you were
yeah,
blocked.
yeah, it's that I can't get onto Yahoo. But it was someone with CBS or NBC or something. I was shocked that it wouldn't open it up for me. PolitiFact, I couldn't open that one. So I didn't get to see any of it. So I'll yield to the two of you.
Okay, that's fine. And I'm sure you'll have some comments on what we have to say.
Exactly.
I watched it with the Revolutionary Blackout Network
Hmm.
because I just was like wanting to watch it with somebody that we had shared energy.
Yeah,
Right, good idea.
absolutely.
Okay, so what were your impressions?
Well, it just seemed like it was the same old.
Mhm.
And, it was that same with different people first starting out and saying, Hakeem Jeffries and the first black, um, speaker. And, then talking about Nancy Pelosi and as if people love her or whatever. And then,
Mm.
it was just like watching it, how they were just pinpointing certain things, saying, oh, wow, this is a black, person in this role. So all black people are supposed to feel a certain way. This is a
Mhm.
woman in this role. All women are supposed to feel this way,
Mm.
playing all those games.
Mm.
And then talking about stuff that they could have accomplished when they had the majority, but now that that it's in a minority, all of a sudden they're talking about issues that
Mm.
like for Social Security, and oh, how they're just like so big with Social Security and um, different issues. They were just playing around, and then with the jobs going overseas,
Mm.
and then the chip makers with the vehicles, and just a lot of stuff was just caused by us to begin with. So it was just so much BS, but making then the unemployment numbers.
Oh yeah.
But when you look at the unemployment numbers, still, even people that do have jobs, a lot of people that have jobs are living in their vehicles. They're homeless.
Mm.
Families are homeless living in their vehicles
Mm.
because they can't afford a place to live.
Yes, because they can't afford it, and they can't afford it because the wages are too low.
Right.
Exactly.
Biden did say at one time during the show, he said that, okay, let's go down. I've got some notes here, so let's go down and see.
Yeah, I
Uh,
should have really wrote notes.
he
Yeah.
touted, he
Go ahead, Joe.
touted 12 million new jobs, the most created, okay, in any 2 year period. He did not have anything to say about the quality of those jobs or the pay level, okay, of those jobs.
Or that the number of jobs had gone down considerably during the pandemic.
Right.
So
He
that
did
it could have
not.
been quite an increase, but it was abnormally low before he took office.
Right. So, in other words, the idea that he created the most jobs in any 2 year period, well, yeah, but you had the easiest
Mm.
2 year period from the standpoint of the potential for creating jobs because so many people were laid off during the pandemic.
Mhm.
So,
Right.
large measure, these new jobs, so called, were jobs that were going to people who were available because they had been laid off during the pandemic. he claimed he made reference to January 6th.
Oh, yes.
He said democracy remains unbowed, okay, and unbroken.
Yeah.
And he's sitting there in the House, okay, of Representatives
Mm.
with hundreds of people, okay, who voted to basically to excuse the people who tried to overthrow the Congress during January 6th. These people have been elected to Congress or re-elected to Congress. They are there now, and they were people who are in sympathy with the idea, okay, of interfering with the process, okay, of selecting a president, uh, which is of course, according to the Constitution, that's a treasonous act. Okay, so uh, I'm not so sure democracy remains unbowed, okay, and unbroken. I'm not sure what he's referring to there, but those kinds of statements, gave me a problem. Then he talked about the United States being a land of possibility. If there's one
Mm,
word to describe America, it is possibility.
mm,
Okay. Unfortunately, too many of those possibilities, okay, are possibilities that people can end up on the street, homeless, without any medical care, okay, in very dire straits. Those possibilities have gotten increasingly serious over the last 40 years. But of course, he doesn't mention that.
mm,
And a lot of jobs are part-time jobs too.
Yes, okay, a
mm.
lot of jobs are part time jobs. He did not distinguish the full time jobs from the part time jobs.
And
Like it's the
then,
part-time jobs, they don't have to pay health insurance, so that's where a lot of the companies are doing the part-time job thing.
yeah, and it used to be that you could get hired by a company and you could work there for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. Now many of the jobs are part-time, not necessarily part-time hours, but part-time gigs. They're contracts, 6 months, 8 months,
Maybe
you know,
3 months.
maybe 3 months, yes, maybe less, and then you have to find another job.
Something else, okay, I noted is that he was talking frequently about how the Congress people, Democrat and Republican alike, came together during his first 2 years to pass some significant bills.
Hmm.
Uh, okay, he's particularly proud, I think, of the Infrastructure Act
Hmm.
and the controls on inflation that were placed in the Infrastructure Act. Uh, and of course, the climate emergency things that are in the Infrastructure Act. Okay, from my point of view,
Hmm.
uh, the act doesn't seem to have done very much for inflation. Inflation is now seems to be subsiding, but I don't think it has anything to do with his act. Okay. He also said at one point, he said he was elected to change things, and he is doing that. And of
But
course, we all know about his quote to
yes,
big business that nothing will fundamentally change with him, okay, as president. Okay.
that's right.
Also, we do not see visible change coming out of his first term. Of course, the child tax credit was a welcome change, but he took care only to make that effective for 2021. And then after that, the child tax credit simply disappeared.
And what about the student loan debt forgiveness?
He did not say much about the student loan debt forgiveness. He said a tiny little thing about it, which I'll come to, okay, in just a
Okay.
minute,
Okay.
he touted the growth, okay, in the economy, and he mentioned that there were 10 million new business applications.
Hmm.
Uh, he did not say how many of those applications were accepted. He didn't
Right.
say, in other words, how many new businesses actually was started. I find that a little odd, okay, and a little tricky. And of course, Biden is very well known for his half truths and also his lies. Okay, so anything that appears to be a little tricky that he does, I sort of distrust. Okay, but of course, he talked about the chips. He said
Mm,
chips were invented in America. Semiconductor chips were
mm.
invented in America. But right now, we make only 10% of them. And of course, we ran out during the pandemic crisis. We could not supply cars to people, okay, and we had other problems. And then he said, we must never let that happen again.
Hmm.
And then he then moved to the Intel chip factory that's opening up in Columbus, Ohio, and he said many great things about it. But he also said that factory is going to supply only 3,000 permanent jobs. Of
Hmm.
course, when he described it, he didn't give us the only. Okay, he just said there'll be 3,000 new jobs there, as if 3,000 jobs is somehow a lot.
And are they permanent jobs,
Yes, he
Joe?
said there are going to be 3,000 permanent jobs.
And where are they going to get the minerals for the chips?
I don't know where they're going to get the minerals for the chips, okay, or how they're going to get the minerals for the chips. He didn't say anything about that,
Mm.
and he didn't say whether getting the minerals for the chips will cause us to be involved in another war somewhere. Of course,
Or
which is a pattern that we've been seeing here. He said very strongly the supply chain must begin in America.
he
Uh,
means North America, right?
I'm sorry. He probably means North America.
Because
Yes,
a lot of the chips can be gotten in South America.
they can be gotten in South America. Okay, and if not the chips, certainly the materials to make the chips,
Exactly.
which
That's what I meant.
to my mind means that the supply chain is beginning in South America.
And yes, and who reaps the benefits of that ultimately? Not the people in South America.
Yes, and so the people in South America, okay, are certainly beginning to be very angry about this. Perhaps more than beginning to be angry about this, but they are angry about this, and they want to stop this situation. They want to make sure that a lot of the benefits go to South America, and so this means that uh, seeking their materials uh, as the years go by may begin to be more and more difficult for us, okay, and unrewarding, depending on what happens in the politics of South America. And there again, there's potential for conflict and there's potential for war. Uh, as the South American governments get stronger and more interested in doing things for their people, uh, then there's going to be more conflict because we, of course, always want to make sure that our companies get the most, okay, in benefit out of it.
So did he talk about Peru or Colombia or Venezuela or
Said
Nicaragua?
said nothing about them, said nothing about South America in the part that I saw. This is not just a deck of cards. Okay, I don't know if the speech is quite over yet. I was just checking for that.
Mm, did he? Did
It
he?
seems to be still on.
It's a long speech. Did he talk about Ukraine yet?
I didn't hear anything about the Ukraine in what I heard.
Hmm.
Okay, let's see. Okay, I think Brandy is watching it. She can probably tell us if he got to Ukraine and what he said. Okay, she is watching online.
Yeah, and is commenting.
Yeah, and is commenting. So she can probably tell us. She was listening on RBN, okay, as well, she says. Uh, okay, there are a number of people who have asked things which we will take up, okay, in due time. But what I wanted to emphasize here was that he did the usual political thing which Democrats do in their State of the Union addresses. Specifically, they promise various things like the supply chain, must begin in America, when obviously that's impossible. It can't begin in America. Uh, we must have the best infrastructure in the world. And
Hmm.
he admitted, he said, now we are 13th in the world.
Hmm.
And we can do much better than that by passing legislation, working together with the Republicans. And my first thought about that was, boy, that is really pie in the sky, because I don't think he's going to get anything out of the Republicans in these 2 years because they want him out. Okay, and the way to put him out is to make sure he doesn't do anything good for Americans. Now, by himself, he's not that interested in that. But certainly with the Republicans opposing him, it looks to me like it's going to be a bleak 2 years. He says, as a result of some of the bills he passed, we are replacing 20,000 lead pipes across America.
Yeah.
Okay, I find this completely out of context. Yes, to improve the water supply. Okay, I don't know. Okay, it may be that we're replacing 20,000 lead pipes in America, but I have no idea whether 20,000 is a good number or whether we need to replace 100,000 lead pipes across America. Okay, I don't know where the replacements, okay, are taking place. So he threw out a number, but how can anybody evaluate whether the number is good news, okay, or bad news? You have to know something about the need for lead pipes to replace across America. We all know there's a great need, but we don't know at all whether 20,000 lead pipes, okay, are going to cover that need.
And I
He,
think the impetus for that, Joe, started in Newark, New Jersey, with the contamination of the Newark water supply, the lead contamination in the Newark water supply. This was actually like 3 or 4 years ago before he came into office. So I don't know if the 20,000 includes those, because that job is about done as far as I understand it. So yeah, it's not only about the numbers, it's about when the replacement will be or was already done, and whether this is a new initiative or completion of something that was passed before he was president.
yes, and what we also don't know, of course, is what's been done about the lead pipes, okay, in Flint.
Yes.
Okay, and we don't know what's been done about the lead pipes in South Carolina, which is another notorious area where they have problems with their water supply because of pipes.
Yes.
Uh, so he provides no context for his
Mhm.
claims, which seems to be the style in these kinds, okay, of speeches. Okay, now he said, of course, I shouldn't say of course, but he said he wants to see that as much as possible things are bought here in America.
Oh.
And he went so far as to say all construction materials for new projects here in the United States will be made in America. Okay, and I'm thinking, how the hell can that happen? Okay, he can put forth some rules, okay, and regulations to give the businesses some incentives to only use construction materials that are made in America. But does he mean to ban but foreign construction materials from coming in? In other words, he did nothing to elucidate how it's going to come to pass, or whether it's even possible that all construction materials that we're going to use will be made in America. He started talking about actually medical care and the cost of medical care.
Hmm.
And he said he knows that medical bills are very, very high and a real burden, and people are suffering from that. And he is very much in favor of bringing healthcare costs down. And he mentioned prescription drugs and specifically diabetes. And he says he'll stop excessive pharma profits.
Ah,
He will see to it that those profits go down and the prices go down, especially when it comes to insulin, that he's going to cap insulin prices at $35 per month. He didn't say how he was going to get around Joe Manchin when he tries to do that. Okay, and he said a whole bunch of things. He said he will veto raising prices on prescription drugs. But when the businesses raise prices on prescription drugs, last time I looked, that was not in legislation that he would be able to veto. The businesses just go forward and raise prices on prescription drugs. Now, there are certain things that he can do if those drugs were developed on the government dime or partly developed by government. He can exercise the march-in rights of the federal government, but he has yet to do that in even one case that I've seen, since he's been in the presidency. He certainly hasn't exercised those rights when it comes to the vaccines. That's something he should have done a long time ago.
well, and Joe, isn't it about more than not raising prices? Isn't it also about lowering prices?
He did mention that. He mentioned the costs, of drugs, that it can be 15,000 a month or 30,000 a month.
He's going to be lifting the emergency situation regarding COVID. And I know a lot of us will breathe a big sigh of relief, and a lot of us aren't looking forward to that. But regardless of what we think about whether there's an emergency, that's going to mean that all of this is going to cost people money. If they want the boosters, if they want whatever they want regarding, in relationship to COVID, they're going to have to pay. What's he going to do that's going to be an additional cost to what people have been paying now.
And furthermore, what he failed to say is that if he ends the emergency, which he's saying, he's going to do now in short order, that's going to reduce his power to control farmer profits. He won't be able to lean on the fact that we're in a national emergency. There are certain powers he has when we have a national emergency that he doesn't have when he ends that emergency.
Then about the people who are going to wind up in the streets because the moratorium on rent on paying rent will be lifted. mean, there's a lot of things that are going to happen in the next 6 months.
Yes, during the first hour, he said nothing about the rental crisis. Okay, I don't know what he said since then. Uh, okay, going past the claim that he was going to veto raising prices, okay, on prescription drugs, he touted the infrastructure bill as the most important climate legislation ever.
Mm.
Uh, okay, I'm not uh, exactly ready to grant that, but whether one grants that, okay, or not, that's totally divorced from the context of what we needed in by climate legislation,
Correct.
climate emergency legislation. We know that that kind of legislation will need to have appropriations in the many trillions of dollars per year, perhaps $6 trillion per year. In this first initial uh, climate bill that he passed, he's only got something like 500 billion in climate legislation there. I mean, it's just totally out of balance with the need. And he didn't say anything about what the need was, but only that he had a victory, okay, in that area. And he wants us to think that that's a wonderful victory that
Yes.
really changes the situation. I don't think it does, okay, at
Well,
all.
and Robert Copland also mentioned that when we were talking about lead pipes and water upgrades at Jackson, Mississippi, also, that's
Yes.
another locale. I mean, are these very local problems in predominantly lower income and Black and Hispanic neighborhoods? Are those going to be addressed? And if we're going to be seeking minerals from South America, are the people whose lands and communities that are being destroyed, are they going to receive any benefits? No. And yeah, there's another, the evictions are already going up. So I don't know. I think what your comment about context, Joe, is all important here. Because he can tout this and he can tout that and he can tout something else, but how does it relate? How does it relate to what's actually happening and what needs to happen?
Right. How does it connect to reality, the reality we see out there?
Yeah.
Okay, he claimed, of course, he said the climate emergency is an existential threat to
Well,
us,
that's
to children, to our grandchildren. He used that kind of rhetoric, kind of rhetoric.
mm,
But he didn't really lay out any plans for meeting this existential threat. Okay, he just said he was going to do it. Uh, he then started talking about uh, how he was going to increase the taxes, that he was going to make the biggest and the wealthiest corporations pay their fair share.
huh.
He didn't say at all what that fair share is,
Yes.
what a fair share is.
And it's and we're going back to the 1950s when they paid, I think, 60 to 70% of municipal taxes, or governmental taxes at all levels, and now it's what, like 15 to 18% of that
Oh,
is
uh,
you know
okay. I
um
think the average that the corporations are paying, okay, lower than 18%, it may be 15 or 16% or something like that.
yeah, so
Okay,
their overall contribution is very low now.
okay, and also the biggest and wealthiest corporations, okay, are the corporations that pay the least, okay, as a percentage of income. I
Mhm.
think, if I recall correctly, there's some figure out there that Amazon is paying maybe 3% of their profits or something like that. I mean, it's really ridiculous. But the point is, all of these things that he's promising, and we'll go through more promises, all of these things he's promising require legislation from the Congress, or most of the things anyway, require legislation from the Congress. He cannot do those things by himself. The minute he gets into legislation from the Congress, he gets into the filibuster and the need to break the filibuster. He didn't say one word about that. Not one word.
Mm.
God bless you, honey.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Okay, so he said we'll need oil for another decade. He talked about that.
Yeah.
That we have to emphasize all the alternative sources, of course, but we're going to need oil for another 10 years. Okay, for sure. So, of course, he wants to continue to work with the fossil fuel companies to ensure that we have the needed oil for the next decade. So
And
we
yet we continue the war against Russia in Ukraine, the proxy war, using fossil fuels.
okay, in that first the first hour, he didn't say anything about the war. Not a thing.
And Brandy said he didn't say anything after that, or I don't know if that's changed now.
Okay,
Yeah,
let's
I
see
mean,
what Brandy says if she's still watching that. Okay, evidently not.
How can you? Yeah, I don't see any. How can he talk about the State of the Union without talking about that?
I don't understand how he can talk about the State of the Union. We have already expended or promised something like $120 billion to Ukraine, and he fails to mention it.
Yeah,
He fails to mention it. Okay, he also goes further. He promises that he's going to crack down on tax cheats.
Mm.
And that's how, he's going to raise more money so that our deficits will be smaller. He said specifically he's already cut the deficit during the time he's been in. Did he claim $4 trillion? I don't know. I forget. But he claimed that he was able to cut our deficit spending by some large amount but since he came into office. He doesn't understand, obviously, that cutting the deficit is actually bad news. The reason why it's bad news is because when the government runs a deficit, the private sector gains money. If the deficit is cut, the private sector gets less money. It's about the sectoral financial balances. He doesn't understand that for the private sector as a whole, getting a surplus in government or getting low deficits, in government means austerity for the private sector. He doesn't understand that. So, of course, he's still playing the fiscal responsibility game that the Obama administration played and that he's playing. He has cut our deficits substantially. And to some extent, that has hurt our recovery from the pandemic. But he won't admit that. He still wants credit for it. He thinks, it's good. He said flatly, the United States will not fall into a debt ceiling default. He said, we will not cut Social Security and Medicare due to the debt ceiling. He wants to sit down with the Republicans to come to agreement on how to end the debt ceiling crisis, and he seems to peg the time frame for that, maybe in about a month or something like that. He doesn't give any indication really, except cracking down on tax cheats to explain how he's going to cut the deficit. He talked about the Junk Fee Prevention Act. In other words, in many parts of the economy, the banks, the hotels, there are various institutions imposing junk fees, on users. This is evidently really exercising a lot of people,
Hmm.
and so it's a popular thing to do. So he's promising the passage of this act. He also talks about the success of his administration in getting rid of non-compete agreements, in business. This is due to the Federal Trade Commission, and Lena Khan, of course, and her activities, which are very, very good. And if she goes through with it, of course, the businesses are going to scream absolute bloody murder and are doing that, already. He doesn't give any indication as to how he's going to overcome that. He said again, we must pass the PRO Act so people could have unions whenever they want to have unions. How long have the Democrats been promising the passage of the PRO Act?
Yeah, and speaking of that, Joe, I don't want to forget anything about codifying Roe v. Wade.
During the time that I was watching, he stayed away from Roe v. Wade. He might have gotten there since, but I don't know. I can't speak to that. He also said, let's have a living wage for all workers, that he's completely committed to a living wage, for all workers.
Yeah.
But when he had the chance to pass the $15 an hour wage bill, which, first of all, that's not enough, for a living wage.
Nowhere near it.
But if he had passed it in 2000, in 21, it was structured in such a way that it would not have delivered the $15 an hour to people until 2025 anyway.
Yes.
So that's what he did when he had a majority in both houses, of Congress. Now I don't want to say that it was entirely his. Well, I guess I do want to say that I think not passing the $15 an hour was entirely his fault. Of course, we all know about the parliamentarian, in the Senate.
Yeah.
I respect the parliamentarian.
Any
We can't go against the parliamentarian. No
any excuse for
yes,
not
any
doing it.
excuse. He completely forgets that when the parliamentarian disagreed with the Republicans in 2002, they fired their parliamentarian and they passed what they wanted to pass. He completely forgets there really no need to fire the parliamentarian at all. The parliamentarian has only advisory authority, can only make some recommendations. When it comes down to it, there was a procedure the Democrats could have used to pass the $15 an hour. It would have required to get past a tie vote in the Senate, and to have the vice president work on some simple parliamentary procedure to get a majority vote for putting back the $15 an hour in the bill. He didn't want to have that done. He didn't even have to have that done. He just could have objected when Chuck Schumer took the $15 an hour out of the bill. He could have told Schumer, keep the $15 an hour in the bill, get a floor vote, make people take a floor vote on that. Then they would have had to have voted against the whole bill if they wanted to get the $15 an hour out. He didn't do that.
Yeah, and some people are commenting here, and you said early on too, Joe, $15 an hour is nothing compared to what an actual living wage would be. So the IHSS workers want $20 an hour, could be $25 an hour. And then what did Biden do when the railway workers wanted some change in their working conditions? He told them they couldn't strike. What is this pro-labor president?
They couldn't strike, and he told them, and if they did strike, he would put them in jail.
Very pro-labor.
Yes, very, very pro-labor. He says, let's have a living wage for all workers. Let's restore the child tax credits. Give school teachers a raise, for which everybody pops up and claps, okay, especially Joe Biden, of course, because she's still a full-time instructor, okay, or professor at one of the community colleges. So give school teachers a raise. There's Jill really clapping for that, as all kinds of Democrats are clapping for that. He says, and let's have free community college. How long have they been talking about free community college and they couldn't pass that? They haven't had any success in passing that. They're completely impotent. Why are they impotent? One very good reason is the maintenance of the filibuster. They have not been able to do anything about the filibuster. They tend to blame it on Manchin, okay, and Sinema. But it seems to me that the 10 senators who voted against putting the living wage back into the bill are also 10 senators who are likely to be against ending the filibuster. It's not just Sinema and Manchin. There are at least another 8 of the Democrats who don't want to get rid of the filibuster. His own people, his own Delaware people, his own 2 senators from Delaware that he has in his pocket don't want to end the filibuster. The 2 New Hampshire senators don't want to end the filibuster. The Montana senator doesn't want to end the filibuster. Angus King of Maine doesn't want the filibuster to go. There are probably at least 20% of the people who vote with the Democrats to organize the Senate who don't want to give up the filibuster. It's not just Manchin, okay, and Sinema.
And Joe, that process has been on the books for 2 years now, 3 years. I mean, at least 2 years, I know. Because K. Ryan's saying he asked Congress to pass the PRO Act. It's easy to ask, but that's been where I don't think there's been any movement on that at all for quite some time. Am I right or am I wrong?
The only way to pass the PRO Act is to get rid of the filibuster.
Yeah.
You have to get rid of it, and you have to get all the Democratic senators to vote for the PRO Act, including the coal mine owner, Joe Manchin. I mean, Joe Manchin, coal mine owner. You think
right.
Vote for the PRO Act? Sure.
No, those militant coal mining unions, they're amongst the most militant in the world, not just in the country. My ex-husband was a coal miner in Scotland, and those folks, when their lives are on the line, right? Then you make a false move, and the whole thing comes falling down on your head. They're very militant and strong. So yeah, I don't know. I don't think Joe Manchin is gonna do anything to help his coal mining union there, coal miners. Um, ah,
Okay, so I suppose the summary of my impressions, I can sort of summarize my impressions of it,
mm-hmm,
is that it's not just about this particular State of the Union speech, but every State of the Union speech I've seen from a Democrat, okay, omits all kinds of
Okay.
problems that we have as a nation. The presidents are highly selective about what they want to talk about. They promise a whole range of things that they cannot get without reform of the Senate and in some cases reform of the House.
Yeah,
Okay.
you just take this one off and you can put another one on again.
Okay. And they
Is it
rely
the
on
extra stuff? Is it the
ignorance
worst?
of the public about how legislation is passed uh, to retain a certain credibility in what they say. But obviously, over the years, the public is becoming more and more cynical about what they have to say. Sort of, oh, you make a speech like this, and oh, sure, this is really going to happen. I'm sorry, say that again.
no, I don't think it was intended for the show.
Oh, okay.
Muted now, so yeah. I mean, it's the rhetoric. I mean, rhetoric is easy. Saying things is easy, and that's why you have, adages like, you know, what is, I can't even think of it now. But it doesn't take much to say something, but it does take a lot to make it happen. And I think not just because people have heard it all and heard it over and over again, because conditions in this country are getting so tough. I don't hear anything about police brutality. What you know, or guns. I don't know what was said about guns, but anything on economics, housing, rent control, healthcare, those conditions are getting to be so difficult for people. Union organizing, wages, student debt, um, and nothing. We people have heard a lot of promises, but nothing has changed. So neither party has delivered anything on those things. So,
And now I just went over to the Indian Express paper and it
mhm.
says Joe Biden's State of the Union, and it says he said that U.S. will act to protect if China threatens its sovereignty, says Joe Biden. And then it said about the State of the Union,
Wait,
Biden
wait,
declined.
wait, wait. Hang on. He said what?
It's crazy talk.
The U.S. will act to protect what?
To protect if
Okay,
China
to protect
threatens
what?
its sovereignty. I guess to protect us.
Taiwan? Is he talking about protecting Taiwan?
He doesn't. It just says here, U.S. will act to protect if China threatens its sovereignty. Then it continues on that Biden declares U.S. democracy bruised but unbowed and unbroken. Putin's invasion of Ukraine has been a test for the ages, says the U.S. president.
So
Let me
that's
see.
all he said about
Uh,
war.
yeah, and it has, while
It's
addressing the gathering, he
the
said that the, okay, let me just continue on here. While addressing the gathering, he said that the U.S. will act to protect if Beijing threatens its sovereignty amidst growing tension with China over a suspected surveillance balloon. Biden said, I am committed to working with China where it can advance American interest and benefit the world. But make no mistake, as we made clear last week, if China threatens our sovereignty, we will act to protect our country. And we did. What the hell?
When did China threaten our sovereignty?
Oh, with a
The
weather
weather,
balloon?
the weather
Oh, you
balloon.
mean with the weather balloons? China threatened our sovereignty with the weather balloons?
I guess he did.
The big bad bully U.S.
Oh, China threatened our sovereignty with its weather balloons. And what does he suppose that we are doing to China when we sort of play games with the sovereignty of China with respect to Taiwan? Everybody agrees Taiwan is a part of China.
Exactly.
The Chinese um, have agreed to tolerate two governments in China. But
Hmm.
according to them and according to the agreements we signed with them, our China policy is that Taiwan is part of China. What was
Exactly.
Nancy Pelosi's trip about except the threat to Chinese sovereignty?
Exactly. And I guess maybe the weather balloon thing was made big news because he was given the speech and they could use it.
You
Isn't that?
know,
Well,
I mean, if that were in fact what we make it out to be, don't you think China would have been able to? I mean, it was so obvious and blatant, just kind of floating in the atmosphere. You think?
The
I
surveillance thing is way up high and nobody even really sees it. Then it has here referring to the ongoing war in Europe. Biden said as he slammed his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, for his
yeah.
military aggression, that the invasion of Ukraine by Russia has been a test for the ages and a test for the world. Would we stand for the most basic of principles? Would we stand for sovereignty? Would we stand for the right of the people to live free from tyranny?
Jeez.
Would we stand for the defense of democracy? Biden posed a series of questions in his
yeah,
second speech.
yes, that country is now completely a dictatorship. I'm speaking of Ukraine. Okay, in
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine, there is no longer a glimmering of any free press. There are no political parties except those that are sanctioned by Zelensky. That
Yeah.
country is locked up as tight as a drum from the governmental point of view.
Right. And when we talked about living under tyranny, look at our law enforcement here. Look at
Mm-hmm.
our law enforcement here. And they're being trained by Israel. So we're talking about tyranny here. We have people, certain neighborhoods have more tyranny than others.
Yes. Okay, so Brandy points out, uh, yeah, Biden's infrastructure bill helped privatize
Mm.
Medicare through the ACO REACH program. It will cut Medicare services to seniors. You cannot blame Republicans for that. Well, he can sort of partially blame the Republicans because uh, the ACO REACH program is a continuation, a slight modification of the previous program, the direct contracting entity program, which was actually started by Trump. And when pressure built, okay, on that program, because it was obviously was a privatization, okay, of Medicare, he responded to the interest groups who objected to that by changing the name to ACO REACH and making some other small modifications. But yes, it is a privatization, okay, of Medicare. It will cut Medicare services to seniors, and Biden owns it now. It might have been started by the Republicans, but he can end it at any time. It is not written into law. It's a creation of the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation, the CMMI. It's an experiment. It's still an experiment. He could declare that experiment a failure tomorrow and end ACO REACH. So he owns that program right now. That program is entirely scandalous. Okay, it's about really the percentage, okay, of money, of government money that will be used for patient care, and the percentage that will be used for profits, okay, and overhead. Uh, um, um, that the middlemen, the new companies, okay, that are delivering Medicare to people, will take. Under the Affordable Care Act, they were limited to, I believe it was something over 95%. Under Medicare Advantage, they have to deliver 85% of the expenditures have to be for real care. Okay, but in the ACO REACH program, they can finagle things so they get as much as 40% of the money for Medicare, and I guess in certain cases, even up to 50% uh, spent on their overhead and their profit as distinct from actual healthcare services to patients. That ACO REACH program has to go, but it can still go. It's not enshrined in law. We can still beat it
Hmm.
if we really lay the pressure onto them. But yes, it's a terrible program, Brandy. Uh, I've studied it fairly closely. It's just a giveaway to the corporations.
Just like the Affordable Care Act in total. I mean,
Um,
just
it's worse than the Affordable Care Act.
well, okay. I didn't. I should have chosen my words differently. As you know, the Affordable Care Act was a giveaway to corporations.
Oh, yes, it was. It was a giveaway to pharmaceutical companies, okay, in particular, okay, but it was a giveaway to the health insurance providers, okay,
Yes,
in
indeed.
general. Okay, but
I'm going to
this,
say good night. I'm sorry, I can't keep my eyes open.
okay,
Good
good night,
night.
Madeline.
Good
Thank
night.
you very much for coming and for contributing.
Good night, Madeline.
Good
Okay,
night, Dave.
Always great to be around Madeline.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.
okay,
Keep
bye-bye.
up. Sorry about that.
That's all right. Okay, so, okay, I did want to ask Steve. Okay, Steve Wolfbrandt was evidently there for the whole thing. Steve, are you still here? Okay. If so, I want to ask you. Uh, okay, is that all he said about the war? Okay, in Ukraine. In other words, what we just got through discussing, or did he say something else? Okay, I guess we'll have to see later, because evidently Steve is not here anymore.
I had something flash on my screen that woman Green yelled something at him.
Oh, that's nonsense. Whatever she yelled at him, it's nonsense.
Okay.
I mean, it's just a distraction. They do so much that's just a distraction, creating false issues for people to be concerned about. Okay, I did want to say something else about uh, the debt ceiling. It looks right now like Biden is going to do what Obama did. Basically, he's going to argue with the GOP over the debt ceiling. He's going to try to mobilize the public and to create the impression that the debt ceiling problem is only about the GOP and that they're engaged in a kind of terroristic act uh, to try to cut Social Security, okay, and Medicare. Okay. Okay. Now that may go far. It may be a successful tactic, but it won't end the next debt ceiling crisis. Okay. In other words, even if he gets the Republicans to move off cuts to Medicare and Social Security, what the Republicans will do to appeal to their base is to get other corresponding attacks or cuts on other discretionary spending in other categories that's important for Democratic constituencies. He is not going to get away with avoiding all cuts to Democratic constituency interests unless he directly attacks the debt ceiling. He has to question the constitutionality of the debt ceiling law, or he has to bypass the debt ceiling law by minting a very high value platinum coin. But if he negotiates with them on it for something, he may be successful in getting no cuts to Social Security, okay, in Medicare, but he's going to pay, or we will pay, a dear price because he'll have to give them a lot of good cuts that they want to other benefit programs that are important for Democratic constituencies. So he's following the wrong strategy, okay, as he usually does, because what he usually does is to behave in a similar way to Obama. Okay, and we're all going to suffer for it. I think that's what's going on. Okay, any other comments, Dee? Or any other comments?
No, he just didn't really talk much about the Russia Ukraine.
No, he hardly said anything about it except to indicate. I think what he indicated here is that we're still in to continue defending the freedom, quote unquote, of Ukraine,
Right.
the sovereignty, okay, of Ukraine. Okay, what I'd like to know is whether he did anything there that indicates that we are finally willing to negotiate with the Russians. Now, I don't know whether Putin would be willing to negotiate with him. Okay, because the West has been very, very disingenuous in dealing with the Russians over the Ukraine. And Joe Biden is not an honest man
No, he's never been.
when it comes to the way he deals with foreign nations diplomatically. So it's very doubtful that Putin is going to trust he or his administration.
Right, and you can't blame him at all. I
Yeah,
wouldn't.
I don't. So I think the only possible peace agreement that retains any sort of Ukraine in continued existence is going to be a peace agreement which is self-enforcing for Putin. That if
Hmm.
we violate the peace agreement, then Putin can do anything he wants to do,
Right.
and he will build in the conditions. So that's the way the real world situation looks. Okay, so Ukraine may end up being technically independent, okay, and technically sovereign, but completely in the hands of the Russians when it comes to foreign policy.
Right.
Because I don't think Putin will accept anything less.
Right. And there are so many people in Ukraine that they've always had a relationship with Russia that it's like family with some of them. You know, their families are connected. Families live in Ukraine, families live in Russia.
Okay, the capital of the first Russian state was in Kiev. That was the capital of Russia
Right.
at one time. The first of the dynasties that ruled Russia was the Rurik dynasty. It was the dynasty that established the capital, okay, in Kiev. So
Right.
Moscow came later.
Yes.
The Muscovites came later. Okay, in the 10th century, when this happened, at that time, all Moscow was a backwater.
Hmm.
Of course, Moscow became the controlling capital, okay, at a later time. Okay, but uh, okay, the relationships that go back to the 9th century. And the first of the dynasties, if I recall correctly, was established in the 10th century. Okay, so that's just the history of it. And there have been many states, okay, in that area for a while, smaller states competing for control, okay, and Muscovy won. And since that time, the Russian Empire expanded and expanded until the empire, okay, was overthrown by the Bolsheviks. And they established, of course, the USSR, which was not, okay, entirely a Russian empire. Uh, okay, this latest empire uh, is more like the Tsarist empire in its makeup. But the independence of Ukraine came about really nearly accidentally when one of the USSR republics was favored by Khrushchev, whose mother was a Ukrainian. Okay, but uh, he gave possession of the Crimea, which had always been Russian, uh, um, but to Ukraine. At the time, it didn't matter, okay, because the USSR seemed very, very stable. And, from Khrushchev's point of view, it was kind of like he gave the Crimea to another state inside of the Soviet Union. He shifted control from one state to a second state, but it was still within the USSR. When the breakup of the USSR happened, then of course it was significant that he had transferred the Crimea, but he himself was long dead. And he couldn't see the mistake that he made. If he knew that was going to happen, he never would have done it. Okay, anyway, the Ukrainian Russian history is fraught with certain very bad events, and we don't have time to go through it here. But it's understandable, okay, that the Ukrainians wanted to be independent of the Russians. Okay, but their desire for independence that goes against the whole history of Russia, okay, and the USSR from 1776 up to the 1990s. So it's hundreds of years, okay, when Ukraine was under the control, okay, of the Moscow government. Very
And then we had the recent votes too, the recent votes, and the votes all showed that wanted to be part of Russia, the different places that did vote. I don't recall the places, but it was about a month ago.
Yes, I do. It was Zaporozhye, the Kherson region, the Donetsk region, okay, and the Luhansk region. All four of those regions were given a plebiscite, and the heavy majority voted for union with Russia. Now, whether that would be the same result if Russians weren't the occupying force at that time, that's another question. Okay, I believe that um, probably they would have chosen by majority to go with Russia, but I don't think the majorities would have been as large.
Right, because they had been wanting it for years to be part of Russia,
Okay,
wanted to hold
well,
the
the
vote instead of just
Oblats
kind
that
of pass it
wanted to
off.
be part of Russia for years, okay, were Donetsk, okay, and Luhansk, okay, the Donbass region. But Kherson and Zaporozhye are not in the Donbass region.
Okay.
Okay, and in the plebiscites, the two Donbass regions voted something like 95% or 96%, okay, for union with Russia. Okay, the majorities were a little smaller, okay, in Zaporozhye, okay, and Kherson. Okay, there was something like I think in one of them it was in the high 80s, and the other one it was in the low 80s, if I recall correctly, okay, which I may not. So Steve Wolfbrandt uh, is still here or came back, okay, and he pointed out that the Vikings sailed down that river. Yes, they did sail down the river, and the Vikings established the first the Russian states. Okay, the Rurik dynasty was a dynasty established by the Vikings, which is kind of interesting. Interesting part, okay, of Russian history. Uh, and Steve Wolfman pointed out the Vikings were hired, okay, as bodyguards by the Byzantine Empire. Yes, I think that's very true, also, Steve. Okay, Steve, I asked you a question before. I don't know if you were here to see it. Did Biden have anything to say concerning the war? Okay, except for the idea that we would continue to defend the freedom, okay, of Ukraine. Did he say anything more specific, or did he hint at any kind of talks with the Russians or negotiations with the Russians? Did you see any of that? Steve Wolfbrand said, I am Viking blood. Congratulations, Steve. That's really funny. I'm pretty sure Steve's still here, so he may be trying to recollect. Oh, he says, I don't know, Doc. Okay, because during the time we were there, he didn't mention the war, okay, at all. Of course, one of the reasons why I wanted to see the State of the Union at all was to find out if there were any hints about a change in attitude. And Amber Lee says Viking wasn't a race with a specific set of DNA. It was an occupation and it was a melting pot. I think you're right, Amber. I think you're right. It's not a racial designation or something that where there was a specific set, okay, of DNA characteristics. Okay, there's been something else I've been meaning to ask you, Amber, which is unrelated to this. We, of course, have been starting the Dump the Corruption campaign. Okay, it seemed to me that you've been working with somebody who's very strong on his hatred of the corruption in the American system. Good night, Kay. Thank you for coming. Okay, and we love you.
Yes, I have to get going too.
Okay, I really have to get going too. I just wanted to see what Amber had to say about this.
Okay, well, I'm just going to say good night to everybody, and
Okay, good
I'll
night,
be.
Dee, and thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Enjoyed myself, and I will see you tomorrow.
Okay, and we'll continue with other great things tomorrow.
Yes, we will. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Okay, so I guess there's no answer, okay, from Amber. And Brandy says good night. Kay says night, honey. Steve says most wolf brants were out of Denmark, Vikings. My mother was the Hornburger fry. Is that the name?
What are 12 types of passive income that aren't taxable?
Oh, I don't know. I can't really name them.
Let me see.
Oh, you didn't hear the question? Oh, okay. The question was we've been starting the Dump the Corruption campaign. Okay. This stream, the Dee and Brandy stream, okay, around the world, is also concerned with the Dump the Corruption campaign. Okay. As well, Greg Mallard's stream is also focused very much on the Dump the Corruption campaign. Also, my streams, 3 times a week now, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, focused on the Dump the Corruption campaign. If I recall correctly, over at KRTD Media, you've been working with a colleague who's absolutely hates the corruption, okay, in Congress. Okay, is there any possibility for collaboration? That's really my question. Brandy says, I have a small amount of Dutch, Van Dorn, and mostly Irish, English, and Scottish, some French, and German. Okay. Now, my mother was a Hornberger, full German. Steve says, I'm whiter than white. Okay. Thank you, Steve. I will be happy to send you more details. Okay, so you and I can communicate by Twitter. Okay, are you still on Facebook? And of course, I'm sure we can do emails. We're no longer connected in Slack, though. Brandy says, I was amazed because my ancestors have been here all before the 1800s. Brandy says, as early as some of the original settlers. Okay, my grandparents came over here. On one side, they came over here in 1905. Okay, after the revolution, okay, of 1905. Okay, after the Russo-Japanese War, that's when my paternal grandparents came over. My maternal grandparents came over in came over in 1914, I believe. Specifically, my maternal grandfather was afraid of being drafted by the Austro-Hungarian army. And he didn't want to fight, okay, in the First World War. So he traveled to Belgium from Hungary, actually, the area called the Carpathian Ukraine. Okay, and he stowed away on a Belgian boat and came to America that way. And my grandmother did not hear from him for a year. And then he wired to have her come. And they settled, in New York City. And my mother, who was the oldest child, was born in New York City in 1915. And my father was born in New York City in 1912. And Brandy says it was surprising to be 100% European. I did a DNA test. Yeah, I guess that could have been a surprise because maybe you're expecting to have, some Indian ancestry, indigenous ancestry, probably. Okay. So thank you, Amber. I'll be in touch. Okay, I think it's time to go. Thank you all for coming. I think at this point, I'm going to say good night. Good night. Brandy, hope you feel a lot better tomorrow. Okay, I know we'll be in touch, though, tomorrow. Good night, everyone. And Brandy says good night as well. And I'll see you all tomorrow. I'll be doing another set of litmus tests to see if anybody can pass the litmus test. I don't really expect them to anymore. And then on Thursday, I'm going to do what I originally planned to do tonight, which is to discuss an interview that Bree Joy Gray had with Rick Wolf. And I wanted to discuss it because the ideas about government finance in it basically shared a frame with the Austerians. And that bears talking about. Good night, everybody.